lucky to live kind of on a farm growing up, but not where one where animals were being hurt or exploited or used for any reason. Just they were my friends, they were pets. And this was in Alabama. We had, a couple acres, and I had goats growing up. And I fell in love with them. I was always the animal lover in my family. I always really bonded with dogs and cats and hamsters, other animals that I kind of was around growing up. And then the goats just changed my life. They were so fun to hang out with. Caring for them was a really big responsibility for me that I started at a really young age, and it taught me a lot, and it got me to wake up early and start my day right. And the time that I got to spend with them just meant so much to me. I was a very shy kid, and I didn't have a lot of human friends. So having those goats and raising them, and when one of them had babies and helping them raise their babies and taking care of them when they got sick, it taught me so much about compassion. And so when I moved away, I learned that my grandparents had sold my goats without me knowing, and it was a very sad time for me, and I didn't forgive them for a long time, and I missed them. And I guess Rainey was my first goat. She was very sweet. They're all so sweet, even the males. They're very rowdy and playful, but they love people. They love interacting. And the thing about domesticated animals is that we've bred all the meanness out of species that felt the need to fight for their lives in the wild. We bred them to be the most docile and loving creatures on the planet, and goats are a great example of that. And then Rainey had babies, and one of her babies was Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the one I was thinking of when I was saying that sometimes they get sick, and I would have to care for them then. And so there were a couple nights, or a few nights for like a week or so, where she was like really bad, and I had to stay out with her like late at night and bottle feed her. So I would hold her, she was so small, and like bottle feed her. And I think I cried even then, and I'm about to cry now, because it's in us to nurture, it's in us to love. We all have a really strong desire to be compassionate towards others, especially the most vulnerable among us. And I'm really grateful that I had that experience with Rainey and Elizabeth and their whole family. There were several goats that we had, and so I'd always bonded with animals other than dogs and cats to a really great extent, which isn't something that a lot of people in the United States can really say. And so I also went vegetarian pretty early on, mostly my own thoughts, also being inspired by some celebrities, musicians that I looked up to. It was definitely kind of like a trendy lifestyle thing that I wanted to try. I thought it was cool to be a vegetarian. I had a really cool friend who was. So I was about 12 and very much in that phase of my life where I wanted to be cool and impress people and try new things. I was also very liberal and different from my family in that way, and so it was a little bit about the animals, but it was more about me. And I had seen some slaughterhouse footage and things like that, and I knew I couldn't contribute to it. But I remained vegetarian for about 4 years. Hang on, let me think. So I was vegetarian for 4 years. And the weird thing is that I had always thought that I was going to be a vegan one day. I thought it was impossible, especially under my circumstances, like with my father. He just wasn't supportive at all, and I was under his household. And he was really worried about my health, and that made me really worried about my health, and I didn't research as much as I could have and figure out that veganism was not only healthy, but it was extremely healthy, and that you could thrive on it. But when I was with my mom, who was more liberal, she would come and visit me in Las Vegas, or I would go and visit her in LA. I would always eat vegan. I always really enjoyed it, and it was again that cool kind of trendy thing. I never really bought into it or thought enough about it to make the change until I saw Cowspiracy when I was 15. And that changed everything again. I had considered myself an environmentalist, and yet I knew none of these things that were in this movie. It was so shocking. Now it's not as shocking because I know that so much of that information is information that a lot of people have worked really hard to keep hidden. but at the time I was just blown away. And there was one scene in Cowspiracy with a duck who lived in a backyard and was going to get their head chopped off, and then the camera cuts off right before it actually happens, and I just started bawling. And all of a sudden it wasn't about the environment anymore. It wasn't about, you know, humans and all the problems that we're causing to ourselves and each other and the world. It was about that duck in that moment, and from then on it continued to be about the individuals and their suffering, and I really connected to that. So for the next 3 months I binge watched a bunch of YouTube videos. Some YouTubers were really inspirational to me, like Freely and Bite Size Vegan. She was really, really inspirational to me. And I just I had all these questions. I think it's so funny that so many people never think about their health in a serious way until they're talking about veganism, and they're like, well, they have all these questions. And that was totally me. I was like, I don't want to be weak. I already had like digestive issues. I was a vegetarian, and you know, people tried to blame a lot of, you know, my health problems on that. But I finally did it. The last thing for me, I was still living with my grandparents, and my grandmother's pastries were so hard to give up. And you know, she really loves cooking for people. It's a huge thing for her. And so I was, you know, I didn't want to hurt her feelings or, you know, break this tradition that we had, something that she really cared about and that I really enjoyed and benefited from. But then when I went vegan, it was almost like a stronger thing. It was a more special thing. You know, she made all this effort to make this food that I could eat and that I wanted to eat and felt good about. And at the time I was a lot more focused on my health than I am now, and I was eating really, really healthy. I was really lucky to be working at an elementary school for an after-school program there, and there would always be so much extra food, so much food waste at the end of the day, and I hated seeing that. But then when I went vegan, I was like, well, I'm going to take all this food. There was a huge bag of bananas a lot of the time, and I would go home and eat it, and it would make me feel so good. I would feel so energized with like big smoothies and big bowls of banana surprise, which is like a kind of pudding thing that I would make. And then my grandma would make me vegan pastries and things like that, and they were delicious, and I loved it. And health-wise, my digestive system, my digestive issues definitely went away. It was like a lot of number 2 problems that you don't want to hear about, but like veganism will definitely fix that, especially after the detox period, the transition period that your body goes through. And I could not believe how much energy I had. It was obviously really stressful, really lonely. I was already the weird liberal queer vegetarian in Alabama, the only vegetarian that I knew, and then I go vegan, and it was just like, it was just the final kicker for some people. They just completely isolated me. But I didn't care. I knew it was right. I knew that I had always believed in things that I knew were right, and that other people disagreed with me heavily on for religious reasons or whatever in the South. It was a hard time. I had my boyfriend at the time, at least, was really supportive, and that kind of got me through until I moved to Berkeley for school. And little did I know this was the absolute best place that I could end up in as a vegan who cared about animals and wanted it to be about the animals. Because I moved here about a week before school at UC Berkeley started, and before school started I was already involved in direct action everywhere. It took about a couple days before I went to my first community event and met some of the most amazing, compassionate, inspiring workers and friends that I've ever met. And it was all about animals. It was all about truly liberating them from the horrible things that I had seen, that I had been traumatized by, not just in Cowspiracy or the YouTube videos, but Earthlings, obviously, and other documentaries since then. Dominion was really, really powerful. So this was definitely the right place to be, because I was very inspired to change the world and do that with what I felt was the first real community that I had ever been a part of, and I consider them a family, and I always will and have.
If you could go back and talk to yourself before you were vegan, what would you tell yourself? What would be the pitch?
Mm-hmm. Well, I might be not a great person to ask about this. I really appreciate brutal honesty, you know, the hard truth, the worst that you can expect, along with the best. Going vegan will definitely change your life for the better. I mean, health-wise, living in alignment with your values, you know, feeling better about your contributions to the world and your lack of contributions to really heinous industries and things like that. You will feel better and you will feel like you're doing the right thing, but other people will not always understand that, and it will be really hard. I think the online community was enough for me before I knew about the in-person community that existed here in Berkeley and in some other parts of the US and the world. I think if now I had to go back there, I would really struggle. But if you're there and you put yourself in the mindset of, okay, I'm going to do this, you know, no matter what, I'm going to fight for what's right and stand up for myself and for the animals and defend this and, approach people compassionately. At least you'll gain respect that way, hopefully. If you're surrounding yourself with people who you should be talking to, even, they'll treat you with respect and they'll understand your beliefs and things like that. And then if they don't, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Just stay strong and move on.
This video was made possible with support from amazing viewers like you. Thank you. If you'd like to consider donating, please check for our latest trip fundraiser or ask about your preferred donation method. We publish all trip expenses with proof of where your donations went because transparency is our highest priority. Thank you for living with love, compassionate people, and together we will make a vegan world.